And welcome to everybody who is attending today's webinar. My name is Raul Seibing. I'm a senior trainer at ATLAS.ti, an assistant professor in the Faculty of Global Communications at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan. I'm happy to moderate this continuing webinar series for IQRN, and happy to listen to research with qualitative research methods. For all of you who are coming in on the Zoom webinar, please feel free to, during the course of this webinar, ask questions using the chat function underneath at the bottom of the Zoom window, or the Q&A button as well. So our presenter will be taking questions at the end of this webinar. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Karen Olson.
Thank you very much. Hello, and I would like to welcome you to this session and thank ATLAS.ti very much for their help in sponsoring it. My name is Karen Olson, and I am based at the International Qualitative Research Network at the University of British Columbia in the Okanagan. I have pasted our unit's email address into the chat so that you can copy it and then keep track of other activities hosted by our group. I respectfully acknowledge that the Syilx Okanagan Nation and their people, on whose traditional ancestral unceded territory UBC is situated. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of your lands. Our speaker today is Dr. Ping-Hung Lee, who is currently an associate professor at the Faculty of Management at the University of British Columbia Okanagan campus. He is also the Principal's Research Chair, Tier 2, in Social Innovation for Health Equity and Food Security, and the co-lead of the Rural Health and Equity Eminence Research Cluster at the University of British Columbia Okanagan campus. His research includes social enterprise and social innovation, not-for-profit marketing, pro-social behavior, multicultural marketing and consumption, consumer well-being, health promotion, consumer privacy, food economy and market systems, fashion and popular culture, and digital marketing and social media. His work has been published and presented in a number of academic journals and conferences. In terms of process, as was mentioned, please type your questions into either the chat box or the Q&A box, and our speaker will address them at the end. Please join me in welcoming Eric.
Well, thank you, everyone, and good day. So my name is Eric Lee, and thank you, Karen, for the introductions for that. So maybe I just start sharing my slide. So today I would like to share the topic and some of my experiences working in the field of consumer research and using video ethnographies, or sometimes people using the work is like videography, and then so as a methodologies for that. And in the very beginnings for that, I'll probably go through a little bit like some welcome and introductions and give everyone some backgrounds of what videographic consumer research like, and also what types of videography we are talking about here or commonly used in as a methodology in the field of consumer research. And I will keep a little bit, maybe around like 5-10 minutes to talk about creating a videographic consumer research, how that like. Is that just like picking up your camcorder and filming and you finish the work? Not simple like that, but that we will spend some time today to talk about that. And also I would like to talk about, because it's a part of the academic research, and how we judge and also evaluate the qualities of these videographic productions for that. And I will also spend some time to touch on some other considerations like the ethics and also the copyright and issues for that. And I think the last 10-15 minutes for that, I would like to open up conversations with you and also with the Q&A session. So as Karen's mentioned in the introductions, but I would like to begin also by acknowledging that the land on which the UBC Okanagan campus located is the unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. And also I would like to invite you to really think about like the land keepers, the caretakers of the place you're joining us today. So who am I? So I'm not repeating my research interest for that. So I'm interested in community developments for that, social innovations component, consumer culture. And in the past, like few pretty much more than a decade, but that I did involved in a number of videography projects. So many of them I did that during my PhD with my professors and other colleagues for that. And but recently, a couple of years ago for that, I'm start doing the videography research again with my students, and we'll watch at least the first filmmakers or first authors for these videography projects. And I will show a little bit like clip of the work we did in last 2 years with you today. So I'm also currently the co-chair of the Association for Consumer Research Film Festival. So in the past 4 years, including this year, for that, I'm co-chairing these sessions for that. So it's very interesting and valuable experience. And then so to sharing the themes or sharing your research through the format of film in this academic conference for that, we'll talk about a little bit more today. So when we talk about the backgrounds of videography and or videographics like consumer research for that, so really thinking about how we build on these traditions based on the visual anthropologies, sociologies, or art and aesthetics, and also the visual cultures for that. It represent different perspectives on phenomenon in the traditional marketing settings and the business for that. But at the same time, when we think about like videography as a technique or research method, for consumer or capturing consumer research tools, and how we meaningfully represent and theorize this phenomena in the social, cultural, or spatial temporal context. And think about between reading a paper and also watching a videography for that. It's not just nice, simple, like the mediums or the weight is different, but that you're reading text or you're reading moving image or animated images for that. But how we kind of contextualize and also conceptualize those like theories and also the context or the message or the narratives is very important. So also thinking about like that, so videography is a different way to create or have establish some dialogue between the place and time. Think about like going back to the spatial temporal context, but that I think is a very important component to think about how these visual compared to, let's say, the text or the verbal format. When we talk about videography for that can also inform our theorizings as videos become an agent in the process by which knowledge is produced. Let's maybe take a step back, moving outside the academic context for that. Thinking about how many YouTube videos or the TikTok videos or the TVs or these kind of like animated videos for that we are consuming in an everyday basis for that. We are watching news, we are watching updates, we are watching other tech talk shows or different type of webinars, including today's for that. And what's the difference between, let's say, the way we are getting knowledge or kind of like conducting our know-how, we're very much like the conversations we're having here, that would be a very crucial components to think about why videography should be also considered as a very effective methodologies and also a knowledge dissemination tools here. When we talk about different types of videography, I present three. I'm pretty sure it's if you go through the literatures or different like disciplines, but that they have a more categorizations here. Where we talk about the first type, the ethnographic themes, but that is mostly as a common practice in anthropologies, especially visual anthropologies, is informed by theories and also the methods and also the vocabularies of the disciplines of anthropology, and how we involve things, the use of cameras or camcorder as research tools in documenting the whole or maybe portions of the cultures with the methodological awareness and precisions for them. Thinking about like instead of like making field notes or having a audio recorder capturing the interviews with that and having a camcorder, and now sometimes people is using Zoom or iPhone. We'll talk about this a little bit later. And to capture these like visual moments and also visual cues with that. So I think that would be a very effective tools for data collections and as well as data analysis. So in the second type of videography for that, we call it the documentary type of styles or themes for that. And so it's usually to do with more like presenting the actual and also the factual features of the issues of the institutions and people. So thinking about the documentaries we experienced in the past with that, sometimes it's talk about different type of institutional settings like the politics or like the school settings or like in the organization. So there's old movies or documentaries about corporations, but that is very effective to talking about like how the organization cultures and all the dynamics between, let's say, the employers and employees and other stakeholders being presented. So usually the documentary film is considered as a non-fiction film about real events and people, and also avoid those like traditional narrative styles for that, and thinking about like the creative treatments of the actualities for that. So this would be the typical definitions of what we call the documentary themes for that. So when we're watching these like documentary themes for that, we're presenting the realities to the audience. So the third type, actually, I will show an examples after this for that, would be more what we call the experimental films. It's more like movie style for that, but at the same time, we're thinking about like the rigorous use after we evaluate the cinematic conversations and how to explore those non-narrative forms of alternatives to traditional narratives or method of working. So when we talk about the ethnographic films, sometimes you will see a lot of like interview or the talking head. Sometimes we use these jargons to describe that. And then so the experimental film actually will open up a little bit more like to the creativity side and let the filmmakers to present what the message or the narratives or the discourses they would like to communicate to the audience for that. So it's really giving a lot of room for filmmakers to decide, okay, the message and how to creating the dialogues between the audience. Unlike the documentary film, that this experimental film sometimes is not necessary to be set in a naturalistic setting. Sometimes it could be a stage performance for that. Or sometimes this documentary, no, unlike the documentary films of that, is not necessarily presenting the reality. So, but it's more like talking about like creating the dialogues and the discourses. People can talk about that. So I would like to show you a video. I might just like stop sharing my screen and then be sharing again quickly. Then so this is the film my student and I is share earlier for that. So. So it's a short video for that. Maybe I just add some narratives here for that. So it start with very much like this capturing from wake up, going to work, and then so finish up work, and then so kind of like going back home for that. So that's very much like a very familiar for you and me for that. So that's our everyday pattern.
So what he said? What a jerk! I kept talking about you, and he kept asking me out. Very naturally, you know. I said no. Asking me out. Very naturally, you know. I said no.
So maybe I just fast forward to the end of this like experimental movie for that. So we really want to capture the time compressions. So through these like theoretical kind of treatments for that. So the ladies are leaving the room, going back, leaving the room, going back. That's very much like signaling how we feel in this like time compressions world. So, so I just stop sharing for that. I hope you enjoy a little bit like the clip for that. We share the link with you. So if you get the presentations later after these webinars for that, so you can feel free to check out the full versions of the movie for that. So going back to my slide. So okay, again, going back to the movies, but we are using the theories by Andre Lefebvre is talking about rhythm analysis of the consumer everyday life. That's to using that these visuals to present our concept and also our statement here. So when we're creating a videographics consumer research for that, always really pay attention to these few steps. So the first of all is talking about videography is all about discoveries. You're not just like making a cartoons or making animations for that. So you should have a purpose. You should have a research questions or the motivations to do that. So having said that, just like if you're filmmakers, or if you're thinking about like making a videography as a part of your research program in the futures or now, so always pay attention to choosing an interesting phenomenon or theory or concept or interactions of these, and also be open-minded for that, because the world is changing every day. For that, the media we use, the stories you're exposing us to, or the inspirations we come up is always change for that. So having an open mind is very important and crucial in this discovery process. The second part is like, okay, once you identify there's a phenomenon for that, creating a roadmap. It sounds like a very robust like research project, and it is. It's part of your research portfolio. You don't want to just like think, okay, well, this afternoon I want to make some movie, then you go out and take some shot. It's not simple like that, but that always think about like identify the phenomena or thinking about like the story. and research the consumer story. So you have to do research no matter you talk about interviews or you go back to the literatures or maybe go back to the history or the archive. It depends on the topics you're focusing on, and really think about like what research questions you want to answer, and also choose a research methodology. Like what I mentioned, videography is a tool, but the process of creating this videography could be various based on the topic. It could just like spend a day in the museum's archive for that, so you can have a lot of visuals component. Or sometimes you can follow a consumer's like what I did as a experimental film, and then so filmmakers for that, so you just like recreating this everyday life and using these visuals to coming out. Or you're talking about go back to those like ethnographics or documentary style type of videography for that, you have to go out to capture the truth for that, or to capture the realities for that. So choosing research methodologies and also prepare a blueprint and also the script. It's not writing academic papers or creating an episode or storybook for that. You always need to have the beginning or the end and how you tie the components together to tell the story. And who is telling the stories to? Are you the filmmakers use voiceover to tell the story, or you are engaging the participants or the interviewees to help you to tell the story? And also presenting your viewpoints for them. So, or let the audience to decide on to discuss for that. So that would be the dialogues you might want to think about and how to creating these narratives, and also the conversation. And also refine the story and present the contributions of your videography. So what would be the key takeaway? So what message you want to communicate with the audience with that, and how this kind of like connecting to the future researchers or the filmmakers to kind of like carrying on these conversations and further developing these topics, or the further this kind of explore these like phenomena and or theories you present here. So that would be the first two steps. And of course, like the third and fourth step, and then would be more focused on the technical components for that. So choose the equipment. So how you going or how you capture? Are you talking about using cameras or camcorders? Sometimes it's getting more affordable these days, but it's still a few $100 US or few $1,000 if you're talking about the professional models for that. But also thinking about your phone. So many of us is taking videos or taking pictures through our iPhones or the other Android cell phones for that. They're very good in qualities or the image qualities, but that you might not need a hundreds or thousands dollars or camcorder. And then so, but you can technically just like using your phones to do that. And of course, like, that might be some accessories to help you out to maintain or to keep the quality of the images. So without shaking or without moving a lot with that. Well, sometimes people talk about in the past like 3 years because of the pandemic. I'm pretty sure, including today's, but that we are in the Zoom world. So can we use like the recording features of Zoom or other video conferencing like tools to capture your videos for that, or creating or generating your footage for that? My answer is yes. And Zoom is using your built-in camcorders, or sometimes you can have those like external webcam. It's still very good qualities, are very decent for that. But also pay attention to the limitations, because you have to bring your laptops and you have to connect to the internet. So the opportunities like you don't need to travel, you can connect to people in other countries or other cities or other regions. But the downsides would be is very limited. You don't really see the environments outside this Zoom cameras angle for that. So always think about that. So that tie into my second point when we talk about productions. So choose your filming site. Are we talk about indoor? Are we talk about outdoor? So the good thing is that indoor is great because you don't really have a lot of like ambient noises for that or people around. If you filming, I do have some experience for that. If you're filming or taking some footage in the outdoor settings, no matter in the theme park or no matter is in the coffee shop for that, and how you avoid those like people's talking. Sometimes professional microphone might help, but in many cases with that, there would be a lot of like editing components for that. Sometimes you might need to use like caption because like the sound quality is not great for that. But that would be the realities for that, and choosing your film site is also very important considerations while you're doing videography work. So, and also thinking about like the private and also the public space for that, and how you capture those like background images or visuals other than just like the talking head or your interview is emotions or body movement. So that would be another considerations for that, and how this like public space in kind of like connected to or interacting with your research context. And also, as I mentioned earlier, for that, so many of the ethnographer and then or phenomenological researchers will focus on how we can kind of like focus on this like naturalistic setting. So is that a real farmer market? Is that a real theme park? Or is that a real festivals you're going to? Or you're talking about like that's a stage type of like settings for that. So to me, for that, I'm open. As I mentioned, in first thing is like being open-minded for that you're open. But at the end of the day, you have to tie back to justifying your research questions, why this way of presenting your thoughts or your narratives is crucial and is appropriate. Of course, I start filming and start editing for that. So there's a few editing software, I would say at the more professional levels for that is Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere Pro for that would be fairly common for filmmakers is using that. It will take some time to learn. And then I always say they just like learning and making movies or videography for that is very much like similar to starting a new project or learning a new statistics tools for that. So it will take some time to get used to that. But once you get used to that for that, then you will save a lot of time. And maybe a friendly reminders, but when we talk about filming and also editing, but that always pay attention to how you store your footage with that. I know that everything is go to the digital world now, so you can store in the cloud or you can store your footage in your computers, but it's not text form. So you might need an external hard drive to doing that. Keeping them safe and also keeping multiple backups is always a recommendation. So when we start editing the films, but that sometimes you might find some limitations in the footage you capture or you filmed. So do consider how to use this additional footage like the B-roll. And then so instead of like filming the talking heads or the interviews, maybe just like filming the environments or the outsides or using other kind of visuals to compensate that. Also the photos, and then so that would be another powerful visuals, and ask your informants to show you the photos or maybe show them some archive or artifacts, but that will enrich like the visuals components of your films. And also really pay attention to the sound effect and also the music. So thinking about like the experimental film I showed you earlier for that. So the music is playing a very crucial part. So because if we take out the music for that, it's quiet. Just as I seeing the real life settings, the movements, open the drawers or open the cabinets for that. And then so, but if you're adding the music for that, it's actually like start moving to people to think about, okay, what the message and also the pace of the everyday life we are referring to. And of course, like finalizing the productions for that, sometimes you add the titles, the captions, or add the credits to the components, but that is always important. But at the same time, for that, that would be always one of the part in your editing or the production process. So the other component I would like to share today with you or here would be the disseminations components with that. So do choose an outlet or multiple outlets for your videography. And then thinking about like those traditional academic conference, including the one in consumer research for that Association of Consumer Research, and in the past like 22 years for that have a film festival track. So if you're part of the conference, if you're interested in doing that, but then maybe sometime you can talk to the conference organizers or the associations to see whether you can have an alternative form of presentations. So, or traditional type of film festival for that, they're always welcoming documentary styles or creative styles of work for that. So that would be another outlet. So also thinking about like the journal publications. So I would say it's growing, but sadly to say that for it's still very limited. So usually the videos have to come with a full size paper. So, but there's some journals, my understanding, at least in consumer research for that, and then they start exploring having the video as a core components and having an extended abstract as supplementary issues for that. So that would be other components for that as in the academic community for that. So we're pushing those like boundaries. Yes, publications in paper form or in the text format is very important, but we don't want to limit ourselves in the future to only to the written components only, so outlet. And of course, like this, there are other part is really leveraging what our social media and also the traditional medias with that, and how we can share our work and also the message and communicating the topics or the theory we want. So always thinking about how we engage the participants and share. So because they're not just like your quote unquote informant, and then but they are also part of this process and creating the work for that, and how we treat that and how we coming back to this individual. And the more important is like how your work can benefit them or make some impacts to them in the future for that. So that would be some considerations, and I would like to share with you today. So I quickly go through some of the criteria for judging the qualities of the videographic productions for that. So I'm using the 4 T's of videography proposed by Robert Kosanet and also Russell Belk in 2006 for that. So the first T is the topical criteria. So we always ask ourselves that, is the videography centered on the topic that is the interest of consumer research and consumer researcher? Is that an interesting topic or is not? So that would be one of the criteria that is it novel, is that innovative? People talk about the digital world, the metaverse, but that is that the same as Second Life or Sim we experienced decades ago for that, or that would be a totally new. And also thinking about like all the TikTok videos for that, is that the new topic is a lot of visuals out there for that, but that would be something consumer researcher or researcher in general are really interested to ask this question. So the other components, as a researcher, we always ask ourselves these questions: what would be the theoretical criteria of this? So does the videography contributes in a compelling ways to our understanding of a consumption phenomena? It is for that. We talk about like certain type of consumer behaviors or consumer cultures or consumer communities we are talking about for that. So that would be another component from ranging from festival goers to, let's say, the new digital media, the TikTokers, how they create a cult between that, and how we theorizing that from academic lens. So how can films convey the role of theory for that, and how sometimes we relate it to other theories or some existing theory to elaborate these cultures or these phenomena for that. So that would be the first 2 T's I would like to share with you. So when we talk about making contributions, and then through videography for that, I will share with this like back 2018, and his colleagues is providing these 4 categorizations of theoretical contributions. So the first one I will probably start with this bottom right corner on your screen. So it's the descriptive component. It's just like documenting a substantive phenomena. So that would be some examples here if you go to this paper. And then so it's very much like presenting the realities and then showcasing that's what is going on for that. And then also creating some elaborations and interpretations of how this. But at the same time for that, thinking about like these emerging components for that is talking about like is using a more focus on the conceptual, identifying, exploring new constructs or developing a new theories based on the videography work. And then so it's more like the inductive approach for that and really presenting some new learning or understanding or concept. So the other components I would like to go to the top right corner is more like the pragmatic component, applying established theory to explain substantive phenomena or influence substantive system for that. It's really related to this phenomenon to some established theories or the concept, no matter he's talking about conspiracy theory for that, or these like different type of social network theories for that. So that would be a pragmatic component to see the connections between some kind of existing theory or ideas or the construct and how these elaborate in a new context or through these phenomena. So the other components or the last components in this matrix is more focused on the theoretical components. When we talk about updating or unifying established theories for that. So how we connecting this when people is talking about anti-consumptions for that is draw on very different or a wide range of theories or concept or constructs that people, why people stopped consuming or being a minimalist for that or anti-brands components for that. But when we talk about creating these like contributions through this videography, that would be the time to creating all these type of behaviors through the visuals to comprehend, okay, what the theory or what these extensions of the existing theory we want to provide. So that would be one of the indicators for the 4 different T's to kind of like focusing on creating the marketing knowledge. So the second last the second last T is more like the theoretical or theoretical criteria for that. So is the videography is dramatically is compelling. So that would be another components for that. So thinking about you go to a movie theater to watch a movie for that. So you want to see a very clear storyline. You want to see how the emotions, the visuals, the music, the sound effect is professionally done. You don't want to have or watching a videography is just like full of background noise and people talking. You can't hear the individuals, or you spend like 35 minutes. It's just like seeing a talking head and talk after talking heads for that. So that would be some dramatic or theoretical treatments that is important to make a videography is more compelling to the audience. So the last components, as I mentioned briefly earlier for that, so the technical criteria for that. So is this videography demonstrates sufficient high production values? So thinking about like the image quality, thinking about the sound or the music you use, and also thinking about the editing criteria or the qualities for that. Is that good, or you is just like seeing things is jumping between footage for that? So this conclude very much like the 4 T's of videography. So the last, I will say probably like 5 minutes, but I will talk about a little bit, and then I will go to the Q&A session. I see some questions is coming in. So some other considerations, thinking about the research ethics. So what rights do we have to film those who we work with? Thinking about this fundamental issue. So we are having a camcorder in hand, or maybe using our cell phone to film things. So how we build and maintain trust in this research context, and how do we grant permissions to film? So over the past 9 decades, but that many universities research ethics board already aware that this alternative form is not just like video audit, kind of an audio recording, but thinking about the video recording, they give a lot of guidelines to grant permissions for that. So you agree to certain level of permissions to show your footage in the academic settings or education settings or commercial settings for that. So, but the informants or the participants have to give the permissions to the filmmaker. So what would be the typical consent process for that? So do you or as the researcher allows the participants to go back to the footage or to check out the final productions before they release to the public or submit to the journals for that? So that's all the consent process to build and maintain trust between the researcher and also the research participant in this context. So when we talk about dealing with some copyright material for that, and then sometimes we have to pay attention to how we request permissions and how we do the member check or getting the final approval. And also how we manage these like publishings to work or the publications issue. So research or journal outlets for that, they give a very clear guidelines for that. So you have to show the permissions, no matter it's just like email confirmations or a written agreement between the research team and also the research participants for that. So that's all required. It's formal, it's robust. And then so, and also in other education components for that, in some case, but I just like create different checkbox for the participants in the consent form to agree, okay, are you agreed to showing these videos or using this footage for research purpose or for education purpose? I can show in the classroom setting or the commercial or the social media use for that. So just let them to check the box they feel comfortable with. And also do get prepared. Sometimes some individuals might come back to the research team and say that, hey, I found my footage is on the social media. I don't want to be a part of. Can you just like make some edit to the video and take my part out for that? So do prepare as a researcher, do prepare these conversations in the future. And also think about like the ownership and also the rights to share these important components for that. And think about if you go to a museum archive or you go to a community for that and people showing their family pictures and also their kind of like the heirlooms from inherit from their families, but that are ancestors, but that so who own those like image rights or who agree kind of like the circulations of these images, but that is a mutual agreement in the consent form. And also the privacy and confidentiality components, because you are having a camcorders or you're showing images of someone for that, and how you protect their privacy or you cannot protect their privacy. So that's part of the consent process we have to go through for that to make sure they are aware these potential incidents or risk kind of by exposing them. But recently, I found this very innovative way to keep in the informant's privacies or the image or confidentiality in a good way and using animation. So that's just like we could create a very much like creating an avatar for the participants. So when they're talking, they might use their own voice, but that they might use voiceover, but keep the original type of like narratives, the message, but using a different presentations. For instance, for that, the cartoons or the animations for that. It sounds it's very good way. So I share with you because I see some good practice in our field is doing that. So to conclude, very much like the discussions, and I will just like throw these, and then we'll come back to these up in the Q&A sessions for wider discussions. Do we think about what motivates you to work on videography type of research for that? Because it's your passions, because of the skill sets, because you see the values of communicating that beyond just like a written paper format. And what challenges did you face while doing videography research before and during the COVID-19 pandemic? So where we cannot travel around or go to our field sites to film or to ask people's questions, but that can we use Zoom, and what would be the differences or what would be the challenges between those components? And how can we better capture consumer experience or behaviors or consumer marketers' interactions through videography in the post-pandemic world? Like what I mentioned, the marketplace or our society is partially move into those like digital world for that. So we talk about like the future trends would be using Zoom is more than the actual camcorder to capture all those things, or we talk about like the hybrid in between those like two worlds for that. So that would be some of the opening questions I would like to invite you to think about. So if you want to share your viewpoints through the chats or the discussion or the Q&A sessions would be wonderful. So to conclude my presentations today for that, so videography is a powerful and cutting edge tool, but it's also a double edge. So thinking about like the differences between the presenting the realities versus like presenting the truth. So when people seeing the visuals for that is more like Susan Gondard is talk about like seeing is believing for that. So that's a very powerful component because the image is so, and people will realize that or we take it that's the evidence, that's the fact, that's the real component or that's the truth. So how we as a researcher is balancing those like conversations. So fundamentally their difference, the reality and also the truth. And also thinking about like how powerful if the videography is manipulating the audience emotions through the images, through the emotional appeals, thinking about the music or other editorial technique for that. You can always kind of like motivate the audience to think in the directions. So the filmmakers want to present. So that's the nature of film. That's the nature of these like videos or visual productions for that. So also thinking about like the differences between the participatory and also experimental possibilities for that. So as I mentioned in the very beginning of this webinars for that, so be creative and also be open-minded for that. So sometimes you might want to really focus on the participatory components, but that some other research is like giving the camcorder, giving the cameras to the participants, and they go out to make their own footage and come back. As a filmmakers, you're more like creating how these productions can make sense of a story or creating a dialogue. Or you will do something like what my student and I doing is for that, just like doing an experiment and how we visually kind of like talking about the theory or the concept we would like to present. always prepare that for that. It's similar to writing a paper, to be very honest, or writing a book for that. So it's always a lengthy production process. So, and also that would be sometimes it's more complicated ethics review process because you involve the disclosure of individuals, faces, or informations there for that. But to me, for that, my advice is like learn the softwares when you have a moment for that and working with some potentially some professionals to help you through this production process or the editing process. Or the other part would be work with your research ethics departments or units for that to make sure it's just like you're not trying and error, but you're actually like following the protocol for doing videography research for that. And also thinking about like the challenge in theorizing videography research for that, I think that would be another components. And so that would be my part I would like to share with you today. So, and thank you so much for having me today, and thank you ATLAS.ti Academies, and also thank you UBC International Qualitative Research Network, and having me for that. So maybe what I'm going to do, I just might stop sharing my screen, and then so I know there's a couple questions here, and I would like to handle.
Hi,
So
Eric.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead with
Karen.
the Q&A.
Okay, perfect. So I saw two questions for that. The first one is from Elena. I hope I pronounced your name right, but then thank you so much for coming. So how interview video, it could be ethnographic films or documentary films, depends on the research for that. And I think it really depends on your research methodologies for that. So the ethnographic films components usually come with more like data triangulations or different parts. So the interview could be the moments you're talking to your, let's say, the participants or the people in your field site. So while you're doing ethnographic work for that, so you're in the place or you're in the space that the community settings or organizational settings for that. So the interview videos whether would be part of those night conversations or this larger context for that. Compared to the documentary style for that is more like some typical Q&A components as presenting and ask them to describing. So I think my quick answers to your questions would be, okay, really going back to the research questions, are you talking about like using a very descriptive approach for that or interpreting approach for that, like doing ethnographic films for that? So let them to do the voices for that. So I think that would be my quick answers to doing that. And from a data collections perspective, interview is interview. So you just find an informant that's talking to, but the questions you ask and also the ways you're presenting the questions and documentary style for that is more or less is close to the descriptive nature of the research. So it's just like presenting what they tell you. So, but ethnography have a little bit other layers for that. So the researcher have to also get in. So what the informant told you for that, but that would be our interpretations or that would be the emerging theme. So I hope you answer your questions in Tina. So the second question is like Luz, and then thank you for comments. Can videography be used in informative research? And again, I would like to see if you want to type into chat, but there's what formative research you're referring to. And then I think my understanding is for that is more like traditional quantitatives or yeah, I would like to see just like what formative research you're referring to here. And then, so, but to me, for that videography is one the you can consider that as a data collections tools put in this way, and then so it's based on the methodology for that. If you want to test some phenomena, or if you want to go to a more like the ethnographic settings and focus on the naturalistic settings of the components for that. So that might be the ways how you use like videography, or the other components would be more like go to the creative side, the experimental videography type of style, and then so you just like focus on the concept or the dialogue of creating these conversations between researcher on certain phenomena or certain theories for that. So yeah, I think that would be my quick response to these two questions. And feel free to use like the Q&A sessions and also the chat box, and then to type or to share your questions. Yep. So we still have around 10 minutes before we finish that.
And so, Dr. Lee, while we're waiting for other questions to
Yeah, please do.
from the audience, I think I'll ask one. And very insightful. I think that as someone who's focused on ethnography, there's a lot of factors that that are in play when we're trying to produce what is it, a representation of what we're trying to capture. And you go into some detail about the production values of videography, the equipment, the software, the techniques, and it seems to me that that there is when we're watching a video or as a consumer, that there is a presumption of mastery, that we are assuming that the person who is producing the video knows perfectly well what they're doing when they're producing the video. And so and this goes into your other point about the power of video to manipulate audiences. And to me, that seems that there's two truths in there, that the videographer or the person producing the video manipulates the audience, but also the environment, the medium of video can manipulate the audience. So how does that factor into the knowledge production process, do you think?
Well, thank you so much for the question. It's very insightful for that. So always think about videography is the production is a production process for that. So we already have the first layer of selective bias, or I put in this way for that. So who you're interviewing, who are willing to be your informants for that, and then our participants for that. Or we kind of setting up what type of data you're collecting and how you communicate through the images or the visuals you're collecting. So then the second kind of like part is more like the representations as a filmmakers and how we present that. Are we just like very much like put the footage or the interview footage, the talking heads in your videography and share that? So sometimes it's very important because, well, again, going back to the ethnography natures for that. So that's the voices, the people. So you're not remaking or changing everything for that. So, but that would be very important to keep those like authenticities and also originalities from the research context. But as I mentioned, for they just like the manipulations, or maybe a little bit too strong to use that word for that, but how you represent the research participants, the voices of them, and how you add things your own interpretation is really going back to the other questions earlier today, but that, and how you're connecting these components to the larger theoretical discussions or conversations for that. So that is really bouncing back and forth between, let's say, the original voices from the participant and how, as a filmmaker, you're showing the process to bring it up to a larger conversation. And sometimes the videography, that's, to me, is the fun part of being a videographer or the filmmakers for that, because you have so many things you can do to really start make it more compelling. So you have a wonderful person is doing a voiceover. I remember a couple of years ago that I came across the theme is like using a very strong American male white man voices, just like doing the voiceover versus like having a very feminine, soft, and female voices, even though they were reading exactly the same script, but you can definitely tell is very different in terms of like from the audience perspective for that. But to me, for that would be one of the parts. But then when we become a filmmaker, it's not just like talking about the context or the script, but it's really talking about like some these additional components and how we can make these kind of like concepts or the narratives or the story being communicated in more effective ways for that. So I think that would be my response to your questions.
Makes sense.
I saw like Aspia is like, thank you so much for coming today for that. So you do have questions. Is there a recommendation length of videos, or does it depend on the story we're trying to tell with that? I would say maybe I put my co-chairs for the film festival for the Association for Consumer Research an example for that. We don't usually limit. So I think in over the past 20 something years, but that we do have some themes is up to an hour. And we also have some short themes is range around like 5 minutes or 6 minutes, but that so we have a very short documentaries or experimental film style, and then so versus like a long, really like a full-size PBS type of documentary style for that. But I would say most of the films came across, or at least I handled in the past like 4 years, including this year's, but that would be around like 20 minutes length. And then it's fit into a very typical type of conference presentation too. So usually a conference, if you present a paper in an academic conference, but that usually you have around 15 to 20 minutes, but I think that is kind of a setting up the quote unquote norm for the length of those night documentaries or the videography in consumer research for that. So, but I think that would be my quick response to your questions, Sophia. Thank you. Yeah. Good. We have 5 more minutes for that. I welcome more questions.
Just a reminder to all that you feel free to enter your question in chat, which is represented by the speech bubble underneath all of our faces, and then there is also the double speech bubble with the Q&A button. Either way, we can get our question to Dr. Lee. And so
Could I?
Go
Sure,
ahead.
Karen.
Sorry, could I just jump in here? I can't turn on my video yet for some reason again, but I'll just ask about, it seems to me that really what you're talking about is that videography is really a data collection strategy. It's not a design. So a person might initially start out with a design and some theoretical development that they want to follow, a line of reasoning that they want to follow. And it seems that what you're arguing for is that you wouldn't always just do videography because it's fun or, interesting, but you would, just like any other data collection strategy, you would use it when there's something that only videography can elucidate, no other approach, because it's hard work and expensive and time consuming. And it strikes me that when there's something about the environment or something that you need to capture because it fits the design that you've selected, it fills in a gap of how data are collected in a particular design. It would be really important. So, for example, in more recent versions of grounded theory, where we talk about how, like I'm thinking about Adele Clark's work in situational analysis, about how the world around the researcher and the participant also affects the way they co-construct the data. If you can figure out a way to capture that using videography, be very powerful and critically important, because it's hard to describe just in words. So would you comment on that? Like how and when you choose to use videography in the studies that you do, because some of the studies you do don't have videography, right?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. No, it's a very good questions and sharing and currents for that. I think one of the part, just like when you talk about the environment, I do came across a few more like videography research or visual research for that, and thinking about climate change. So I think that would be a very powerful for that. If you compare, let's say, the landscapes of certain regions or the Arctics like 50 years ago compared to what we see, and it's just so difficult to capture or just like presenting those differences in words. So we need to have those like visual. It's really going back to yes, videography is a data collections way of doing that, but also thinking about the powerful of the visuals in general in the research field for that. If you can compare and contrast, let's say, these archival images to what is going on in the Arctic now, and then so 2023 for that, when people seeing those differences, and then you have to kind of be tracking all the changes and how the community responses of the change their way of doing things for that. So you can definitely start imagining those like, okay, well, the climate change for that now you can have a very much like a swimming pool in the Arctic versus like in the good old days where it's always frozen. And then so that type of visuals differences is also enriching the conversations and also the conceptualizations. And also going back to a little bit like the emotions or the quote unquote the manipulation sides with that. So when people or the audience is seeing those differences with that, they definitely will jump and start paying more attention to, okay, how we can address this issue in a proper ways for that. So I think to me for that, videography is yes, a data collections tools. Second, and also really thinking about when researchers designing a videography for that, and also thinking about the strengths or the power of these like visuals can help them to tell the stories or to present them. So it's not just like doing an interview with the camcorder. So simple like that, but what other things we can capture, like the spatial and the space components or the temporal components, but that is crucial. And I think the third part I would like to emphasize too for that videography is also a very effective knowledge translations or knowledge mobilizations tools with that. So it should be as powerful as a written paper in academia, in my opinions, but that of course, like the academia is still more biased to publications. But I think we should always think about we are living in 2023 or the digital age with that, and how these visual representations of our work or our research findings could receive like the same attentions and credibilities as the written formats with that. But I think that would be some of my sharings to closing very much like today's webinar for that. But I hope I answer your questions to Karen.
Yes, that's great. I want to follow up with you about that because I have some ideas. Thank
Definitely.
you.
Thank you. Okay.
Do we have time to there's one more question. Do we have time for that? If
Oh,
that
yeah, sure. Yeah, I do. Yep. So that's attendance. How often do you find videography is typically integrating consumer research outside of the academic space? Is this common in industry space seeking to better understand their users or consumers? But that they do quite a lot for that. I think that would be some marketing agency firms that put in that. And again, I don't want to say it's like Netflix is a marketing firm for that, but actually Netflix do a lot of like documentary styles of components for that, which is, again, to me for that, that's how the industry or the non-academic side is informing the academic side. So people writing stories or doing research about Squid Game. And then so to me for that, okay, well, because it's mass media, it's popular culture, it's kind of a triggering what is going on, and it's kind of a thinking about from I may just like answer your questions from an ecosystem perspective, thinking about like the role of the academia, but that is kind of by building up knowledge and creating these academics or theoreticals or conceptual conversations with their audience. But the other side of the industry, the marketplace, but that they're using videos way more than written report, and then so in disseminating the visuals or their findings or their kind of like the communicating the understandings of the consumers for that. I think to me for that would be a good dialogue between, let's say, the practitioners or the non-academic side of the market versus like the academic side of the markets for that. So I think today I'm more focused on the academic side of the, let's say, the visuals or the videography for that, but I will always say it's like the industry actually is like doing a lot. And one of my very early projects for them, I just like doing videography with some of the fast food restaurants, and then so the computer store or kind of like manufacturers for that, to understanding how the consumer interacting with their, let's say, the meals or preparing the meals for that, and then so and how let's say interacting with the computer in the good old days for that. So having said that, the industry actually like really thinking about those like videos components or those information is very powerful for them to coming up with different ideas. Yeah. But thank you so much for your question.
And thanks to all of you for all of the questions that we posed to Dr. Lee. And thank you to Dr. Lee for a very insightful presentation. This concludes our webinar as part of the IQRN webinar series. And hopefully for more information, visit the ATLAS.ti website and visit the IQRN website for future webinars and more resources rather on qualitative research. My name is Roel Seibing. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you to everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.